All right, y'all, today I got the unique opportunity to talk to Saul Bankaitis, the CEO of Collinear Group. Little backstory, Collinear Group was the second place that I worked in my professional career. I've learned a ton from them. I had a great 6-year stint there. I was so excited to sit down with Saul and really get his perspective on everything that's happened in the past couple of decades in aerospace. We cover his critical advice for anyone entering the engineering field, especially in this age of AI, how to navigate some of the tough politics of startups and small businesses, and his one leadership move that every founder should not undervalue. Now, as the president and CEO of Collinear Group, Saul leverages deep expertise in serving commercial clients and government agencies operating at the highest levels of aerospace and aviation. His industry-leading consulting team helps manufacturers, suppliers, and operators reach new heights by building intelligence and technology to solve the most complex challenges in aerospace. One other little note, the camera had audio issues on this episode and the next one, so if you hear a little buzzing or humming, please bear with that. I think you guys will really enjoy this episode. This is number 22 of How Not to Build. So, first question, what are you grateful for?
Well, this is going to sound maybe a little bit cliche, but it's great to see you and see someone that I haven't seen in what has it been, 5 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
5
long
or 6
time.
years.
And you take a look at, we came from the same corporate kind of environment we were in. We were doing different types of work, but we were in the same group, same challenges, and we kind of went our own separate ways. And when you go reconnect back together, we're healthy, we're happy, we're smiling. That's kind of cool. So the whole way I was driving Issaquah, I'm like, I'm going to see Dan. I bet you I know he's going to look like. Tallish, thinnish, lots of hairs, lots of smiles, and here you are. So congrats. There you go. You met expectation.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and it feels like, I moved to Texas 4 years ago, but a lot of people I haven't seen in 6 years. And so some people, when you see them 6 years later, like you can tell they're older.
Yep.
They look a little different. You look the same.
Oh, thank you.
You look great.
There's a compliment in there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
No, appreciate that. Yeah.
Yes. Very cool. All right. So is there anything that you're anxious about? Just in general in life?
Anxious, I'd say, yeah. There's instabilities, obviously, geopolitically, right? Anyone that has children, we recently have a granddaughter. She's a month old, I think.
Congratulations.
Way
First one.
First one, yeah. So that's a bit of it's a milestone, and it kind of reframes your mind a little bit. It puts you in you are the generation now above, okay? So it's not just your kids, you're one layer higher. But when there's instabilities, you kind of tend to focus maybe a little bit on that. The odd thing is, to me, when I was born in 1966, 66, you go look up a history book. There was bad stuff going down for sure, and domestically, So it isn't like the world has changed a lot, but you still you see that and go, you know what? Do I block the news out? Or do I kind of look at it with concern? And there's probably a little bit of that. I'd say this instability is a little bit on the concern. I have a wife who she augers in on the news, and if I don't see the news, she'll tell me about it. So that throws a little anxiety, but I think rightfully so from her perspective. So
yeah. Would you say the times have changed from your perspective? You're born in 1966. Have they changed, or are they kind of the same in many ways, just a different dynamic?
I think that's well said right there. I think they're very similar in that everyone says, well, we're divisive now, Well, yeah, I think there's evidence of that for sure. I think you can go back 20, 30 years and say we're divisive. And so it's just a different way of what lens are you looking through and where's the divisiveness. Now, unfortunately, we have a leader who on Truth Social will post stuff that is divisive. That's going to be, and that's not I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying, read it and read it forever and ever. Do you want your kids writing stuff like that? The answer is no, you don't. And I think that makes for very quick evidence, but behaviors 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago were still equally as divisive. Mm-hmm. And that's one where sometimes you see it out in the open and you can point to it. But back then, I think it wasn't much in the open, and culturally people had to accept and change that. So, I like the way you framed it. It's not much different, but you have to really kind of look at it differently.
That's good. Okay. And then one thing I just realized, I did not check the mic levels. Oh, all right. So grateful, anxious. My third question that I ask every guest when they come on.
Okay.
What are you hopeful about?
What am I hopeful about? What am I hopeful about? I would say certainly within the family confines, right? It's one where you hope your family is growing old with you and is healthy and happy, right? Father time's undefeated. There's people that come and go in your life. And In our case, we've never really been beset by a big tragedy like that. So, and again, this is one where, we've raised 3 daughters. They have really come through life very well, and it's great watching them grow up as adults. So I would say my hopeful is really spending the next several years enjoying that. That's a big focus for ours, and I think that's a natural progression. I'm not climbing a ladder at work. I'm not looking to, go conquer new territories as a company. This is we've done well, and I want to see my family grow. So that's the hopeful.
With AI, we were just talking about AI and changing the job scene, changing the tech scene. I know there's a lot of kids these days that are kind of hesitant to go pursue computer science degree.
Right.
You've got your daughters that are adults now, first grandbaby. When you think about that next generation, what advice do you give them for career planning in all of this tech turmoil?
That's a great question. I remember being asked that question. I'll call it one phase ago when MySpace came out. Remember MySpace? Okay, there's a chuckle. So you remember it, which of course morphs into Facebook and this and that. And you could see kids in their early teens disconnecting from, I'd say, physical interaction with other kids. And I felt back then that was a really bad idea. And now, obviously, when, someone older says bad idea, it's almost like my parents saying, don't listen to the Beatles albums, what is it correct or not? And now you take a look at things like, Australia's banning social media for anyone under 16. It's one that, people are recognizing that there's a bit of a behavioral change in how kids are learning. Now, having said that, kids learn things so much faster than adults do. I don't think I've ever configured my phone. I hand it to my kids and they actually do it right. I don't go to the Verizon store. I just throw it to my kids, and they if they don't know how to do it, they do figure it out. And that's one where in the next phase, I think it's just even a level higher. There's so much stuff that is going to be generated for you. The question is, are you actually learning anything, or is it all going to be embedded in some sort of an app that you just push a button and it's all there? And I think my advice back to your question would be, at least understand what it is that you're doing. And so if AI helps you generate it, if AI has a solution for you, at least understand what that is. And I think that's going to go a long way for people to not get sucked into the AI machine.
Is there a point at which I'm thinking, like, when I joined Boeing, it was like, oh, COBOL and Fortran. I've seen Fortran, never had to touch it. Never had to touch COBOL. And then yet I've worked with systems, massive systems that built on those building blocks. But by the time I worked with it, I'm working with, JavaScript or these higher level languages. Does there come a point where even though the AI is generating it, you just don't care anymore?
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of applications in engineering that are the same way. It'll, in all these cases, especially when it's highly regulated, you have to be very careful that it's correct. But there's a lot of ways where do we need to be doing the tedious but necessary work if it's already done? And so long as you know why it was, how you build the blocks together, I believe that you don't have to care anymore. Related to that, my youngest daughter's an engineer, and she said, "Hey, Dad, I want to be an aerospace engineer like you." I said, "Well, flattered, thank you, but let me give you some advice." I said, "Go and get an ISE degree, industrial systems engineering." And back when I was in college, early 80s, mid 80s, ISE was not a degree that was well understood, because you didn't have all these building blocks of what you could fuse together and make a system. Well, now you do. And when she left the college, she had offers from Estee Lauder, Goldman Sachs, and Coca-Cola. These are 3 extremely different companies. Aerospace, she would not have gotten an offer from either one of those. And she would have been hanging her hat on, hey, how's aerospace doing? But essentially, these large corporations see the value of, look, take the data that's out there and help me be a program manager and boil it up to a solution. So she took the Goldman Sachs job, and she's working in the finance industry as an ISE. And so I think that's to the point of, no, do we care anymore about the tedious but necessary? After a while, no, not so much. And maybe the older people are hanging on to that. The younger people aren't. The question is, do they know what they're actually constructing? And I think that in many cases, yes, they are.
That's a really good and interesting point too, because maybe one of the new differences is that with my example around the aerospace stuff, I mean, that's code that was written and stable. It's not changing.
Right.
Whereas AI, depending on how you're using it, it's generating new stuff all the time. And so that provides a very unique challenge of how much do you need to care about that generator? What kind of box can you put it in? You remember the 787 would drop the battery into the box?
Yes.
It's like, what kind of box do you put around it?
Yes.
You kind of let it do its thing. And then just in case you've got these hard boundaries,
Yep.
Interesting. So you said, I think it was mid 80s when you were graduating. So how did you get started with engineering? What was your first job?
Yeah, well, first, I'd say first passion was my dad was Air Force that worked at NASA. So I was around technology. And I remember when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I was at Burke Lakefront Airport, and I saw the Blackbird whiz by, the Lockheed, SR 171, and you're just looking at it going, wow. And then I saw a Harrier take off, vertically, and it's loud as hell. They didn't have earplugs for kids back then. A lot of regulations have changed, but I was just fascinated by the flying machines. So I went into aerospace engineering. And then when I left, I ended up getting a job at a support service contractor at NASA. NASA budgets back then were goofy. So I went on space station and didn't really like the job at all. And I had a boss that recognized that. It was a very technical job, control systems, analysis of satellites. I just didn't like it. And he put me into a crew ops job where I did requirements for space experiments and trained astronauts on how to use the experiments. I just loved it. And I would go to Marshall in Alabama for hardware checkout. I'd go to Kennedy for launch equipment checkout. I'd see the launches in Kennedy. I took wife and kids to one time, and it was just like, you're part of the space program. And so that became a passion very quickly. And that was where my systems engineering acumen kind of was born. I'm not a super technical guy, but again, more around the ISC path. That's why I told my daughter, I said, you want to be like your dad, I'm not a super technical nerd, but I understand engineering.
But get a solid foundation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then super cool. Actually, my grandfather worked, I don't know exactly what he did, but he worked for NASA for a time during that same period.
Okay. Which NASA?
The one down in Houston, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. How did you go from that job to being interested in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's people that are born entrepreneurs and they're always pushing that envelope. And then there's people that, they've taken a few turns at crossroads and they found themselves in entrepreneurship. I'm the latter. And, so the story is very simple. We lived in Cleveland and, 2 kids and 8 years working for the same company, and we didn't have a plan to move. But, budgets at NASA are very government related, and there's a lot of stress, and there's jobs going away, and I had an opportunity to move to Seattle. And when I moved to Seattle, I worked for this wonderful company, Cytor Corporation, and a friend pulled me into there. You remember Tom Galambos? Yeah. And but I remember the founders they were visionary. They were leaders. They were people that really, they brought you in and said, we're going to take care of you, and this is how you take care of the customer. And they were ex-Lockheed Martin people, actually probably ex-Lockheed before the merger. And they saw the inefficiencies of large companies, but how a small company can very nimbly get things done. But their training was outstanding. So that wasn't entrepreneurship, but they really taught me leverage. They taught me, you know what, you can go in and work 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, or you can set up a job and then bring other people in to get it done. And they really showed me how to grow as a person, even though my touch points with the leaders weren't very direct. Their generals were quite good about, spilling that culture downward. And that's where, of course, I met Ben Bicknell, and that just became hey, here's how you behave on the job, and here's how you don't take credit. Here's how you're a humble servant, and here's how you do value adds. Back to your question. Sorry about the ramble, but it's good. Learned entrepreneurship. Then, of course, as that company kind of went its own way, we had to formulate, as you well know, Techtura, right? And that was a 10-year, do the same thing, but then watch the larger company kind of crumble for whatever reasons, right? And then when that was left with nothing, I actually left that job, left Techtura at the age of 45 without a job, so. Was it a entrepreneurial move? Nope. It was one out of, my wife found a job, so I guess I'm going to quit this place before I die of stress. And so entrepreneurial stuff came like quickly right there. But when I say back then, it was one of those, it was a forcing function that said, start your own company or else, and there I was. I mean, I had 3 kids at the time, 2 in college. My personal balance sheet was the worst. So when people complain about, I don't know if I have the money to start a company, you do. And that was just one of those, it was tough times, but once you start that, the drive is huge. You've been there, you start it and you've got to drive. If you don't drive, you're going to fail. So
there's nothing like the survival/starvation mindset.
Yes.
It allows you to invent all kinds of ways to just figure it out. And you can't really, I don't know, in my experience, it seems like you can't really give that to somebody without them living it.
They have to learn it. And sometimes failure is the best mechanism. You learn very quickly. And then, if you get a redo, you understand, how to hustle. But anyway, that was a very exciting time. Yeah. I joke with my family, the day I quit my job, 2 days later, my daughter totaled my car. And so now I'm at home without a car. Okay. So I have less money now. I have less means.
I'm just imagining The dad in the bathrobe at home.
That's right. That was very funny, and there's a sense of humor about it to a degree.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I do want to talk about Techtura, but before that, you said something. You said that Saitor, you said the training was excellent. Was that formal training or was that just the informal?
they had a formal, I'll call it an agenda. When they had meetings, there's purpose around this. This is how you behave. And, they were very clear about customer and consultant were always above the company, and they walk the walk. They didn't just show PowerPoints and say, this is what we think. No, they actually did it that way. And so all the treatment they did for the client and the treatment they did for the consultant was just, it was blue ribbon. It was incredible. And you could see it in their behavior. And then you could clearly tell the people that, obviously as you go down the org chart, they would send us to leadership training, for example. I remember going to Aptos, California twice, and you'd be holed up in a resort for the weekend, and they had speakers come in, and they ground in, this is how we behave. And it wasn't so rigorous to where it wasn't getting traction. It was almost like you believed it. It was a culture. And when we had these yearly events, these big parties, at some sort of a resort, they'd reinforce. And, when the messaging is consistent and clear and the behavior follows it, people do it. I remember that company, people moved for contracts often. Like we'd get a contract in Colorado. A lot of times they were classified, so I don't know what the work was, but someone would go set up, hey, I'll set up the office. People were loyal and they followed these leaders, and rightfully so. It was a great company. I think they sold out to SAIC eventually, but they grew very, very big. They scaled. When I was there, I think at the time there were about 500 employees, and they scaled the culture to 500, no problem.
Wow.
Yes, very impressive.
That's really cool. I think, especially with my origins in Boeing, anytime I see any kind of corporate training, it's just like there's few things in life that I truly hate. That is one of them, is corporate training.
Yep.
I think you bring up such a good point though, because it sounds like, for them, it wasn't, part of their written stated goals that they have to achieve to make some stakeholder happy. It was
Right.
like, this is truly who we are.
They believed it.
Training was high quality. And like you said, they walked the walk, and there's just no replacement
Nope.
for walking the walk.
What was interesting, Dan, was, one of I'll call it the grandest disciples, Don Farrell, he ended up forming CTEC. Now I believe he's retired, but you could see that post Saitor, what people tried to do to replicate what those founders did. And you could see some had really good traction, some of them not so much. And it's just because you have to have it ingrained in you. And they sure did.
Well, we'll get into this later, but honestly, I feel like I had a very similar experience at Collinear.
Yep.
And just the way that you and Ben ran Collinear, and obviously I was there for 6 years and felt very much the same, that just everything I saw, I was like, I was telling you earlier, a lot of the stuff I saw at Boeing, I had this gut sense of like, this is not the right way. I don't really know what the right way is yet. And then when I went to Collinear, it was just every step of the way, this is the right way.
It's
the right way.
That's a high compliment. Thank you very much.
I learned a ton, so I'm really appreciative at that time. So then coming back to Techtura, you mentioned your 10 years at Techtura, and you mentioned that you have to fail to learn some things. And this is the How Not to Build podcast. So what would you say was your biggest failure at Techtura?
Biggest failure, certainly when I realized that the company was eroding, and that was one that was hidden from me. I wasn't a founder. I didn't have money in the company, so I'm not privy to all the details, right? But there was a day, I do remember the day when I learned that, oh wow, we're in really bad shape. And really, I would say my biggest failure was more so, hey, you know what? Bugger in with the customer, forget about the company. You're part of the rumor mill. You're out there, and that's not value add. And I'd say if I look back, bad behavior, go do good by the customer, but also, keep your team elevated as much as you can. And I would say that there's a lot of distraction. Now, certainly distractions were everywhere, but at the same time, you have to rise above that. And I would say that, and maybe it was a maturity, or maybe it was just as bad as the environment was, I have to really kind of give that a think. But, I did not rise above that environment. I was part of the churn at the corporate office, and I would say not really getting along well with, even the C-level. I lost respect for them. And okay, so if I'm acting a certain way, they'll lose respect for me. Guess what? You're just going nowhere as a company that way. Now, maybe it wasn't fixable for anything I could do, But you know what? I never put in the effort to see, hey, if I put this much effort in, will it help? I'll never know that. Not a regret, but I would say that was a mistake.
Okay. So it might be sensitive, but I
Sure.
might ask you to elaborate a little bit, because it sounds like, I mean, you talk about bad behavior and distractions, and I think you're saying that you saw that going on.
Yeah.
And when you say you didn't rise above it, I guess, did you get kind of caught up and kind of start to copy some of those bad behaviors? Or was it more that you just, in an unhelpful way, like distanced yourself?
The latter. Absolutely. It didn't become part of that. You know, I would say I distanced myself without holding people accountable. And that's really where, accountability might have at least, fixed a few things. But there's, again, I'd go example for example, but
Give us one.
I would say that the way cash was managed and the way we had to pay our bills for, support, so subcontractors, a lot of them were retirees, friends of mine, right? I mean, I brought in like maybe 6 friends of mine. They were retired or they had a second career, and man, we were so many invoices behind. It was just every Friday was, a yell fest at Saul from guys that I brought in the company because they're not getting paid. And it's like, some people were patient about it. At the end of the day, I believe they were all made whole, which is cool. But Dan, every Friday, my drive home was, shoot, it's him. I'd answer the phone, and take my lumps. And part of it was, okay, do I go fight the fight and make sure they get paid? Or am I like, the company's doing what they're doing? And that's where, like I said, I could have been a little more involved in that one. And, for one, people would have gotten better answers, right? Secondly, they probably would have gotten paid on the same schedule anyway. But it's one where at least my company would have known, you guys are really screwing this up.
Yeah.
They knew it, but hearing it from me might have helped a little bit.
What do you think stopped you from doing that?
There's so much going on from a, I'll call it the whirlwind of change. This is one where, the economy really tanked in 2008, the global economy. They were holding the bag on a lot of, European interests. You can't divorce yourself from European business very easily. There's laws that say that, or Canadian employees. Hey, I want to lay someone off in Canada. I think it takes a long time. And so you're holding cost. And when there's a slowdown, you're not selling, ERP systems or whatever they were doing. Right. And so there's that. And, so we're just focused on the Boeing business. And, I think that, it was easier for me to just say, just leave me alone and let me go do what I know is basic and stable. And I think that was my nature back then.
Kind of keep your head down and try to, a natural desire maybe to stay out of the politics for
Right.
somewhat of a legitimate reason, but sounds like it kind of was at the expense of the people you were supposed to be taking care of underneath you.
Yeah. And I would say I would say more so, I'd say the strain was probably more laterally around the people at my level, because you just know whenever you're in the office, it wasn't pleasant. There's nothing, that was, hey, how you doing today? Well, we're doing crappy. We know it. And you don't talk about your problems, so you suppress it. So, that just creates all kinds of, internal stress issues, so that I would say was a chapter that, probably redo it. But, when you get into something like that and it's one step at a time, it's like a slide. You don't really see the magnitude of it until you're at the bottom of the slide.
Yeah.
Going, wow, that was pretty bad. So anyway,
Maybe it's a blessing in disguise that we don't see the magnitude until the end sometimes.
yeah.
So one thing that you've mentioned a couple of times that I think would be useful to talk about is value add. And I don't know if it's a generational thing or something, but I know there's a lot of folks in my generation, maybe a little bit after me too now, they want to add value, but it seems like they struggle to do that. Some guys I talk to, they're like, well, I'm the idea man. And I don't really care about your ideas. I care about getting stuff done. So is there anything you can share with some of your learnings through kind of Techtura and those days about, like, I guess bring it down concretely to us, like, what did that value add look like then? And maybe is that still the same value add folks can provide today?
Good question. Certainly. And I think that is a different answer for, I'll call it the timing, right? And I'll just randomly say 10 years ago, what was value add? I remember many, many ways when I would start an engagement with a client. What is it that they really want done? Okay. They have something written from procurement that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
but you can kind of get a flavor for where they're trying to go. And what we specialized in, and as you well know, is go in and, okay, do something to show that you're doing forward progress. Don't tell them everything's wrong, we're going to go backwards. That doesn't really fly, right? Politically and of course across budgets, it doesn't fly. But you go in there and you do something and you show them that, one, you're not taking the credit for it, you're helping the team, you're working within the team, and you're actually going to morph the job into what they really needed in the first place, or what they needed as time goes by. And once they understand that and start following, the lead that you're doing, they'll start realizing, hey, Dan didn't come here to take over the world, to work me out of a job. We're actually working towards a really cool solution. And it throws that personalization into what that task has now become. And, for us to come in and do a contract job, just a prescribed task, that's not how we're wired. We're coming in there to solve a problem. What's the problem? Not completely defined yet. And so I think there's a lot of fun in that. It's almost like a hunt, right? It's like, what's the true requirement? And then how's that requirement changing? How's the target changing as we're going? And am I the right person to be the point person as the requirement's changing? In many cases, it's not. You're not, or in many cases you are, and you go on and you solve a problem. And then when it's solved, it's an amazing thing. Everyone says, wow, that was heroic. Do you remember that? Everyone remembers in project work. Do you remember the successful project? And those teams are bonded. They remember each other. They still have beers together once in a while, and it's a real fun thing to see. And then you go later on. So that was we're talking about value add. So back then I think it was very it was kind of easy. It's kind of analog value add, right? It's like, hey, go in and say, hey, do this, and oh, hey, you know what? They're doing this now. I think now things have gotten a little more complicated where true value add, it's as you're building things with, especially how you have embedded software, you have AI tools, it's almost like there's a shorter gap between what the solution is going to look like. So value add is more like your specialized skill set's got to be a little more exacting. I didn't have to be of any tool knowledge 10, 15, 20 years ago. What tool you using, I'll figure it out. It's pretty easy. Right now, there's a little bit of, I need someone who understands how to code this way, or at least how this code works, and then also understand the technical problem. So the value add, I think there's more that you have to bring to the table coming in now than 10 years ago. And I think that as time goes by, that's going to get tighter and tighter.
Interesting. So I love what you said kind of 10 years ago. And I think some of that still, one of the things you said is not taking credit, which I thought was really interesting.
Right.
And I think that just kind of shows, you talked about humility earlier, but really coming in, and you mentioned it too, just like the servant leader style,
right?
Of just, I'm here to help, keeping that at the forefront. That reminds me that one thing I see sometimes is people don't want to do certain jobs.
Correct.
And that's kind of foreign to me personally.
Honestly. Same here.
I think a lot of it's just being humble enough to just say, look, if the bathroom needs scrubbing. I remember it resonated with me just based on my upbringing, how Ben, your co-founder of Collinear, Ben would often say, if you see a piece of trash on the floor, pick it up. And that spoke volumes to just who he was and who you guys were. But also that was just the attitude that, again, I think is tough for people to do these days. Would you agree?
I
see that spot.
Because you reminded me of a story. Okay. So, piece of trash, pick it up. Okay. So back to site tour, Roger Mead, in one of his training sessions, he would always tell a story. He always had a way of kind of having this anecdotal story that had some humor in it. And he always had a point. One time he was held up at CTEC's parking lot, but he convinced the robber, hey, I need to leave for parking. Can I at least have $10? And then the robber gave him $10. It's kind of funny. And he said, oh, a bad thing's happening, but what's okay? Don't make it worse. Yeah. It's kind of funny. Anyway, so back to a piece of trash, pick it up. He told a story, and of course he very eloquently would speak. He said one time he was on the road and some guy was hauling lumber and his load fell off. And fell off all over the road. So guess what happens? The road's blocked. And this is in, Bay Area. So it's a bad thing. He said, no one did anything. So what did he do? He went out and started helping the guy put lumber back in the truck. Okay. So why not? Right. I remember one time I was out at, Winthrop, Washington, and some guy had turned the corner and a whole bunch of firewood came out on the intersection. Well, guess what? No one's doing anything. So I was the one person that went in it and put it back in. And so it's one of those things where you're right. It's almost like people don't want to, or they don't know if they're supposed to, or they freeze and it's okay, look, just put it back up. And now, secure your load next time, buddy, but at the same time, it happened and it's done.
Yeah.
And so get it out there and mitigate the problem. And, it's a mindset.
Mm.
And I think you and I were raised the same, big families, you made toys out of sticks, you figure stuff out,
Yeah.
and so just go figure it out. And that's a value add for sure.
No, I think that's really good. You also mentioned helping the team, which again, I think is a lot of personal agendas and ego can kind of work their way in. And if you're there just trying to help the team, I like how you said, what's the real requirement? And I think my generation's a little bit maybe better at that now, honestly, than perhaps we used to be, where we do care a bit more about, I want my work to have an impact. And so I think we're sometimes a little better at thinking like, hey, what's the outcome
Yep.
of this? It's not just about my code. It's about making some customer happy. But I still think that gets lost a lot. So I think people fall back on what they know how to do. Well, I know how to code, so I'm going to stay in that lane versus being able to take a step back and say, well, and yeah, I remember dealing with this at Boeing too. It's like, okay, they want this program, but like you said, they don't really know what that looks like yet.
Right.
Kind of helping them define the requirements of like, what should this actually do? What's going to have the end business value that somebody's going to pay for, and kind of working not backwards, but making sure the end is in sight every step of the way.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of knock on the commentary of job fulfillment, right? I mean, I think a lot of people maybe point to millennials and say, oh, they always want a job.
Right.
I think it's a big deal to have job fulfillment, to know what your end goal is and to know what it'll look like, because then you can assess the impact, and happiest people are the most productive. And if you're actually working on something, say, you know what, when this does work, I am making a difference in what I feel like. So I think that maybe I was not an early adopter of that job fulfillment thing, but I've thought about it a little bit more and go, you know what? You want to work on something that you look at and say, I did that and I'm proud of it. And, generationally that's changed, right? Back in the 60s, look, work, you bought a house, work, and who cares what your job is, just do it. And now it's not the same anymore. And I do think that has come a long ways.
Okay. So 10 years at Techtura, I was thinking about talking about your journey, because you ended up at VP by the time you left. Do you have any comments on that? Just like any advice for, how you got up to that VP level? Any tips you would give people just trying to, again, maximize their value and make the most of wherever they're at?
Yeah, that was purely, again, I think in any case, there's situation and there's action that someone does to harvest that situation, I guess, lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. And for us, we formulated Techtura 10 days prior to 9/11. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh,
September 1, 2001. So I remember I was at Boeing on a super secret, project in their R&D world, and we're watching 9/11 go down, and you're just kind of going, this company was formed on probably some software reseller, but there's an aerospace arm. That's the cash part. Whoops, that's going to be tough, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, obviously not to disrespect, the true tragedy, but from a business standpoint,
doesn't change things. Yeah.
As it turned out, okay, I was right place, right time. I actually grew the business in that year, in that arena, and then all of a sudden, you start leveraging and growing more and more. Then they launched 787 and you program all kinds of needs. So the team grows very, very big. And I grew a large book of business, went along with, apparently, he can lead customers, he can lead people. So it went from leveraging on-site and then going to that position.
Yeah, makes sense. So you spent about 10 years there. So then we'll kind of get back to where you ended earlier. I think you said you were 45 when you left Techtura. 2 girls in college. One of them totaled the car. You're at home in your bathrobe and slippers. How did you get into Collinear at that point?
Yeah, great question. So I would say I was off, not working for about 4 months. And, Ben had already retired. So he was out, doing his thing. And, I let him know I quit, and he's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, and really that was my first, first time I said that out loud, I don't know what I'm going to do. You can think it, but when you say it out loud to someone else, you're like, okay, this is real. What am I going to do? So, they start looking for work, and, obviously you look into the aerospace world and, what can I do here or there? And there's a local company, a consulting company that was chasing me, Slalom. Great group. I mean, you could clearly tell they've got a way, they've got an energy. And I was like, oh, you know what, that this is kind of okay. I'll go there. And they started interviewing me, and I went from the bottom recruiter to, I just started, going to the top with interviews, and it was one interview after another. And, after a while they started taking me to the Met, feed me steak. And I'm like, 5 dinners in, I'm 10 pounds later. I'm like, you guys going to hire me or what? And I remember the day, it was the day before Christmas Eve. And they did give me an offer,
Okay.
and I was looking at the offer and then looking at the structure going, oh man, yeah, it's all around billable hours, and all that stuff. And, of course, again, I'm not going to change their system. They've got a working model. And so I called Ben on the way home, and I was like, hey, Ben, this happened. And they gave me this offer. And, I need a job. I don't have a car, bathrobe needs a wash, that kind of thing. And he just said, well, why don't we just form a company and run you through a shop at Boeing. Okay. And then, so what happened then soon after was, I
run you through a shop at Boeing.
Okay. So you know what? I think I actually, so what had happened with the offer with Slalom, then Boeing came, I'm sorry, this two things happened. A really good friend of mine from Boeing said, hey, we need you to be the, mission manager for the 787 entry into service.
And so somebody from Boeing reached out about that same time.
So I'm not going to go in and say, let's start a new company, put me in the supply. No, they're like, you're going through, Volt, Cascade, whatever you want to choose. Take your drug test, see you tomorrow. But then Bennett suggested, hey, why don't you just do that, and we'll form a company in the meantime, and then we'll start that way. And so I declined, with Slalom, and again I give them all kinds of props. They were real pros, and I started doing the dog work. I don't know if you remember what I was doing there. I worked 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 6 days a week. And it sucked because 787 was really a poor behavior on the way up, entering the service. It was run by a team that, demanded results. And so it was high pressure, when airlines had airplanes on the ground, it was chaos. Yeah. And, we had a real type A leading it, and things got done. But it was one of those, I remember driving home from Everett at 6 a.m., which is bad traffic to Bothell. I'm already tired. Yeah. I take my cat nap, and sometimes the other mission manager wouldn't come in. So you just double shift it. I had more 93, 95-hour weeks than I can remember. It was horrible. It was one where Ben and I, we reformed and say, so how's this going to go? And what happened then is, our lovely Techtura that was still going really started to flake apart, and people started to realize, hey, they formed a man. Let's join them. And, there's a couple people, Aaron McLuhan was very early, came over because he had an area where Techtura could not do business in because of their credit rating. That's not anything that's just the way it is. I'm not saying anything, not true there, but, then Alex Ramirez comes over, Steve Runo comes over, all these names, and people are like, oh, you know what? They got some A players over there. So then, of course, we went from, I think year one was 2 to 6, and then 6 to 18, and then like 18 to 40, in 3 years. That's kind of the trajectory.
So, yeah, because I've wondered about that, even from, in many ways, me following in your guys' footsteps with what I'm doing with Gemini, but Ben was retired. So you're doing 93-hour weeks at the peak. Or the valley, the lowest point, whatever. But Ben was able to focus on the business full time.
He had to set up infrastructure. He had to, obviously, those little things, just every little thing in the world that I had no idea about, I oftentimes get briefed, in my haze of coffee rush. Sue would be telling me what she did. I'm just kind of like, okay, that's good. I'm not going to remember this in 5 minutes. Literally, you can see how the mind absolutely needs rest, because that was just a grinder. And that was about 6 months long.
6 months.
A lot of sixes in that story. But yeah.
So then they came after you. You guys were able to set up the company, got the first job. They basically hired you through Collinear at that point. The second hire, how did you guys line that up? Was it just contacts and people that you already knew that you were working?
You mean, I'm sorry, the second hire, you mean the contracts or the employees?
Employees.
So a lot of people, obviously, they knew Ben and I from Techtura. So once, the movement from Techtura was poor, you could tell people were coming over. And it was one of those things where one comes over, and another comes over, another comes over.
So then on the I guess I meant the contract side. That's what I was thinking. It's like, because you had that 787 contract Did you expand that one to add more people?
So the 8.7 contract, yeah, the 8.7 contract was always through. I think I was through Comforce, so that almost didn't count. That was just me donating my income to the company.
Yeah.
So Ben was getting half.
Works out well for
Yeah, no, but hey, if there's anyone to do that with, he was the guy, right?
Agreed.
But what it was, so work that Techtura had that they couldn't do anymore because of whatever reasons, it was very easy for us to say, hey, you know what, we've hired this person came over, and you know how it is with large companies. Look, I want that person. I don't care who they work for. And for us then, it was very easy to get into the procurement chain. So you had a relationship there. When we brought certain people over, Boeing had to go across all 4 groups of procurement. There's defense, global services, commercial, BR&T, all that stuff. And we had those relationships from yesteryear, and they were of no value for Techtura, essentially. They really lost. They really dropped the
There was
ball.
essentially work falling on the floor that
Someone's going to get it.
Not to make it sound easy, but the opportunities were there.
Correct.
And you guys were well positioned to have those conversations and pick it up. Because again, it was a lot of the same people too. So it wasn't even new names per se to some of the buyers.
Some of them were long lead time still. And, when you're only 2 people, boy, I realized really quick that you can get a contract, then the person starts working, then you can invoice, then you get paid someday. And so it's that first, at least 3/4 of a year where you're really grinding, and cash is king. But, we're pretty lean and focused. And I think that the cash I did on all that OT, put some food on the table anyway.
Helped.
Yeah, it definitely helped.
So, and I mean, again, you guys have left certainly a legacy, I think, at Collinear. You've been there now for
15 years. 15 years, yeah.
15 years. And you've seen some changes. You've had some high times and some low times.
Absolutely.
And if we had 2 more hours, we could talk a lot of details, but in a broad stroke, what's been your biggest, you've been a VP before, you now did this. What's been your biggest leadership learning?
Wow. Yeah, that was one where as soon as I read the question, I'm like, wow, you're right. This could be 2 hours. And, and again, this is back to, okay, look, can you stop real time and ask yourself what you need to learn, or does time just go by and you look back and say, oh, I just learned something, you wish you could stop yourself a little more. But what we saw, just to kind of compartmentalize that 15 years, there was 7 years of basic and stable, we're running the business. The first 2 years don't count. You're scrambling you're running around. It's a honeymoon phase. You're getting new contracts. People are coming over. It's happy times, but you're busy and you're focused on that kind of stuff. But then there was that, I'll call it very basic and stable, where yes, our customers are doing well for us. What could go wrong? Well, okay. So how about Max loses an airplane? Max loses another airplane. COVID comes. Okay. Was there another thing in there somewhere? I would say that software dev costs just went through the roof, and
COVID, yeah.
it kicked us out of any large projects with the large OEM and aerospace, because the cost structure didn't support it. So you talk about every problem that could hit it hard, and we had to go from this. Okay, there's that first 7 years. Let's push those aside because they're gone. And then let's go from, we're 90% Boeing commercial in our customer base, and it goes to 0. Okay. So as a leader, you have to learn very fast that, okay, pivot's a great word to use, right? Okay. Pivot's nice on paper. How you actually do it, and you start to learn very quickly that you better enable people that will be your future leaders. And if you don't, you better do it yourself and show someone that you can actually do it yourself. And I did not have it in me to go down the digital manufacturing path, for example, on defense budgets. I didn't know the people, and I didn't know the technology. And there's a few folks that we have, and they're still with us today, that just absolutely understood that technology. They understood how to correlate the data. They understood how to tell, the OEM, this is what you actually own. This is what you actually track. This is what it's actually telling you. And they're like, I didn't know that. I could have never put that together. So all my tricks on, systems engineering and airplane certification, well, you're not putting out any airplanes, and anything to do with the MAX is not going to be farmed out to another company. Boeing's got that in house. We had to really pivot, and we found new leaders very quickly. And that's one where I wouldn't say I suppressed that at all, but I would say I was probably slower than I probably could have been in enabling. Because a lot of times, these things happen and there's a state of shock. What do you do?
Yeah.
And, it wasn't just COVID's one thing, because it put the entire industry in peril. but it also divided people politically. Hey, I don't want to vaccinate, but this person better wear a mask. Oh, the beauty, Dan, is we had 2 offices back then. One of them, we signed a lease just before March of 2020, just before COVID hit. I will say, I argued for the 1-year lease, and we got the 1-year lease instead of the 5-year lease, but we ended up having it for 3 years. But what the interesting thing was, it was Snohomish County versus King County, the renting office. So you had different rules. Well, Snohomish County, you didn't have to have a required vaccine card, where King County, you did. Well, so, hey, you know what? You got a beef, just go to that office. And it almost made it almost convenient, not to be lighthearted about it, because people were pretty charged up about that. Now, within Collinear, I think we were very professional about it. But it was a ticking time bomb. Anywhere you went, it's like, okay, where am I? Who am I next to? Why are you 4 feet away from me without a mask? And people would just get, it was I don't know. It's one of those things we'll look back on it and go, and what was the psychology behind all this, And so, no, that was one where it was something different every day. That's for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, it's an enormous challenge going from 90% of your company being BCA related, and then having that drop off basically to 0. When you talk about, and I love that you express some details about what the pivot looked like for you guys. And it sounds like a big part of that was you finding leaders within the company.
They percolated quickly. I didn't have to look very hard. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did that mostly just look, I mean, like, I guess, tell me about what that trust looked like. Cause there was a big part of trust there where, like you said, you didn't know that part of Boeing. They did. Was that you basically just hands off saying, it's up to you, we're sinking or swimming here?
I would say that it wasn't, I wouldn't say it's up to you, because obviously, you have to guide hey, what are we really doing here? And how are we monetizing what we're doing? But you could tell that there's a team that was harnessing this nebulous thing called Industry 4.0, which large companies were saying, we're going to have digital transformation.
Is that still around?
I don't think the term Industry 4.0 is in vogue anymore. I would say that digital thread is still a real thing, but I think from my knothole, people are understanding that you don't just walk in and you're digitally connected. We're digitizing things so we can understand what we're actually doing and being more efficient. And so what Collinear was doing, again, these are the leaders that were really rising. It's people that really know their stuff. We're taking it in chunks and showing the add value of, hey, we're showing you this. This is going to connect with this. This will connect with this, as opposed to Industry 4.0, we can deliver it in a year. No, you can't. And we really started to win the favors of getting more piecemeal budget, and then go from program to program to program. And now with presence-based execution being a conversation point at the high levels, I think that's a huge success. But that came from this smattering of pieces of budget under Industry 4.0. And this is back to, what's the real requirement, and are we solving a problem, as opposed to we're just doing a task. Doing a task, but we're not here where we are today. Solving a problem, that got us there.
Sounds like a very real relationship. It's almost yin and yang or something, of kind of top down and bottoms up. It's like top down, you know that there's kind of this big nebulous Industry 4.0 thing that has some truth to it.
Right.
Some legitimate interest.
There's something there.
But then really kind of figuring out the tactics that support that, and then really highlighting the tactics.
Right.
Kind of back to, like, you can say all kinds of marketing gobbledygook that you want, but to go in and say, here's what we've actually done in the past 3 to 6 months. Here's how it's actually moved a needle somewhere. And then just building on that. And
you can't tell me Industry 4.0 solution will look the same year in, year out. Technology morphs. So this is one where you just keep going down the chain, add the value. What's the real requirement? And are you part of the team that's delivering it? So that's a wonderful example. But no, that was the big pivot. And that was out of my relational wheelhouse, let alone technical. It wasn't like I know all the people. I didn't. So it took a lot of relationships, but also people accelerated the relationships very quickly. And so that was huge.
How long do you think that pivot took from kind of the worst point of realizing that there's no more work, dealing with that reality, and then back to, hey, we're kind of feeling stable again now that we've invested all this time and effort?
I would say 2.5 to 3 years. We had I think 2019, we had a nice year. So we had some belly fat going into COVID. Okay.
Sure.
But the food came off the table pretty quick. And, we also put money into our development of PBE. That was on, we did a lot of stuff on our dime, cause people weren't utilized. We weren't laying people off. We had a couple of oopsies where one project, we had one of those procurement calls on Friday saying, stop work Monday. And for how long, we're not sure.
Yeah.
So we floated a lot of people, so that set us back. But it's one where back to cash and running a company. If you're not fully committed and you're afraid, then this is not a business for you. So in some cases, it can be easy. That first 7 years, it was fun and easy, but then all of a sudden now it's really, really hard, and you have to make sure you're committed to people. And that was, but I'd say 2.5 years is probably a good. And the thing is, Dan, 2.5 years of not really having a true compass that you're pointing to, going, this is where we're headed, because everything changed all the time, and so you didn't really know. So I would say that the biggest, I'd say, attaboy goes to people on our team that stuck it out, because they didn't know. And they knew we didn't know, but they had to just trust that, hey, you know what, we're doing everything we can. They're still paying us. We're going to do what we can, and they believed in sticking together and doing it. So that's really hard for an employee to do, because I know I didn't have answers for them. I know Alex and I would sit there someday and go, I don't know what we're doing. This is changing. We have no idea how this is ever going to come back. And to this day, Boeing Commercial for work for us has not come back. Because there's reasons for that with unions and all that, but that's a very small part of our business still.
I mean, that's got to be a testament to kind of going back to just the importance of the culture that you guys built, even during those 7 years of feast.
Yeah.
And people being able to trust you in the few years of famine that were to follow. And I know things weren't easy, and there was a lot of tough decisions and stuff throughout it. And you're right. Sometimes the toughest thing is just, as an employee, looking at your leader and sort of realizing, like, they don't know where they're going either.
Yeah, that's right.
That doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me.
Right.
But for the most part, keeping a lot of those folks and, having people rise to that challenge and saying, hey, how can I help? I think pays dividends.
Yeah, I think there's a combo of, I do believe we led well through that, but also I would say that people reacted well. And when people don't react well, it really taxes leadership really quick. But I think we had a combo of both worlds, and it was kind of cool.
I feel like followership is a dying art.
Yeah.
It's tough. I think people don't fully understand, what is that old phrase? Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
That's right.
What do you think? I mean, in hindsight, like, what would you do differently throughout those 2.5, 3 years of sort of figuring it out, like, leadership wise? What mistake do you think you made that if it came again, you would say, you know what?
That's a good one, because I would say we went through it quite well for the business that we were in. So aerospace supplier of services in COVID, post-max, 90% Boeing Commercial. I mean, are you still around? The answer is yes. That's success.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I would say that looking back, though, I would say my criteria for leadership in the company, and I'm talking about, like our general leadership team, I didn't define it very well. And I think that we had a lot of rotational type going through, and that just created chaos. Now, chaos was already there, but you know what? Don't make more. And I think that we had, managers of the month in some cases, just because we were trying things out. And they'd come and go, and it was all fine. But I'd say that there's more chaos in that one than there should have been. But again, that's one where, looking back, it's easy to say that now, but back then it was a real mess.
Yeah, no, it's so easy to look back and see those things. Kind of like you said earlier, like you can't see it in the moment. You're just doing the best you can with the information you have, and hoping that people understand.
Yep.
So what's next for Collinear? I mean, you guys are back in a good spot, it sounds like. What are you most excited about looking forward?
We have there's a lot of work that, we can ask ourselves, do we stay at the same scale and do the work we're doing? Or do we go partner with someone, or really go out and do something different to scale it? So one thing we did is, you recall that we acquired Xylarium. We merged with Xylarium, Andrew Hosh's company. Andrew Hosh, what a wonderful guy, and his entire team. We retained 100% of their people. And this was back when, hey, we were going to do software dev work. Well, that changed. But you know what? But their people were so versatile and such excellent, just cultural people. They're still a perfect fit. So that was just one of those things where I'm so glad we did that. It's great to reacquaint with Andrew. He was a Katrina survivor from New Orleans, and he came to Techtura.
Really? I didn't know that.
And he was this IT guy. And I was like, that IT guy's kind of cool. And he started learning about what Andrew really knows. It was just amazing. But anyway, back to the question. Sorry.
Which, by the way, Andrew was on the podcast. I don't know how many episodes ago now. I'll have to look it up.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
So if anybody wants to watch that.
But again, back to relational business, right? I mean, man, followership and just people, knowing each other, knowing their capabilities. It's great. But
yeah, looking ahead.
Yeah, looking ahead. So there's things we have One, in our customer portfolio still, we do a lot of work in advanced air mobility. And I'm floored by how technology has just gone from, little drones that can take pictures at a wedding to, hey, you know what? These are going to carry people cargo. And we're really heavy in the certification aspect of that. But that's going to require different infrastructure. A lot of these places are in different parts of the country, and they're difficult parts of the country to get to from Seattle. One of our main customers is in Burlington, Vermont. Okay. That's, you can get there, but it's tough.
Yeah.
And there's others that are, they're around the country. And this is one where, do we want our next phase to be expansive to where we're getting brick and mortar in these places and doing a whole replication of what we're doing? I don't think that's right for us. I think invoking a partner company that does that is something that's going to help us scale.
Yeah.
And really another thing too, along those lines, this is back to, tool sets and AI and things like that. Much larger companies that have the R&D budget and they have the know-how of really having their homegrown tools or understanding what the large OEMs are doing when their tool set, we're going to be chasing our tail constantly at our size doing that. So we're starting to learn that scalability is tough. We really go in and we can do that, hit the beachhead, and then we can grow a small team. Yeah. And then that work kind of comes and goes. So then we do it again. What's made that difficult, honestly, Dan, in the last, I'd say 5 years, is back to COVID and back to the hybridized environment. I'm a fan of the hybridized environment. Look, I'm in Issaquah right now. This is fun. I'll be in the car. It's great. But you know what? I've had my career and I've met my friends. I've met my connections. When you're at home, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
The household pet's not going to help you leverage down the road, right?
That's right.
And this is one where I think this is going to be a gap on how do you teach someone to leverage when they're at their own home and they're doing their work as a standard, at least as a hybridized environment. And you have to kind of really put them through that training program, and it's really hard to do. So that's one where I'm looking at it going is what's our longevity for something like that? We have great people that do that, but you know what? They're going to retire. We have to replace them, and you have to find a way to instill that into a training program and really get that culture instilled. So that's a priority for sure. Mm-hmm. It's a mentorship program, but you have to have that it factor to really want it. And then you also want to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be less hybridized. I'll be on site more. And you're starting to pull teeth a little bit,
Yep. No, even I resist that. I mean, I feel it both ways though. I mean, a lot of my network's up here, which is great because I can work remotely for that network, but establishing my network in Dallas, where I'm at now, has been a total challenge for me these past couple of years. Cause it's like, well, I got to leave the house to do that.
That's right.
I got to go in the city. Well, who am I going to meet? And it's just a different dynamic,
I mean, first, we're able to hire people from all around the country. Now, what I learned quickly, if you want to go jump to lessons learned, I have to do a lot of tax statements for states. I'm like, damn it. I forgot the IRS actually likes to make you pay taxes on money that you touch. And so-and-so is working out of New York State. Well, here's a letter in the mail. I was like, geez, I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, that's cool though. I think the advanced air mobility that you mentioned, I mean, I do think, even though I think somewhat like AI, I think there's a lot of, what do you call that? Pounding the sand, like people trying to figure out what to do there.
Right.
I do think there is a strong future there once we sort of figure out where the real business opportunities are going to be and sustainable ones, not just like, here's a roadshow with a new prototype, but true, almost consumer grade impacts. Very cool. Well, Saul, thank you so much for being here today.
Dan, it's an honor. And like I said, I'd love it when you reconnect and everyone's doing great and smiles. It's been a rough go for the country for 5 years, and this is COVID. And for aerospace, the funny thing about aerospace is that it doesn't track to global economy. Typically it's its own thing. And, they make movies about aerospace engineers, remember Falling Down, Michael Douglas. That's an old one. That's before your time.
I recognize the name.
This is in California where, there's a big slowdown in aerospace and they made a story about that one. But anyway, it's great to see that, you and I have both pivoted and we're happiness is great in the job. So this is very enjoyable. So I appreciate it.
Is there anybody, before I forget, I mean, you kind of mentioned partnering with other companies, maybe people that are maybe closer to the OEMs, but is there anybody specifically that you guys, Collinear, is looking to connect with?
We have some touch points with some large companies. I'm not going to name them just because, there's nothing definitive right now, but there's some that are an absolute great match. You take a look at some of these and they understand, for example, the Dassault tool system. Well, that splashes across all these OEMs, whether it's automotive, whether it's, across the airplane companies. And Some of these you look at and say it's a perfect marriage. Some of them, they have a very robust tool set of model-based systems engineering, and they also understand model-based systems engineering. Some that really understand airplane certification and systems engineering and can commoditize, this is back to AI, really commoditize a lot of the dog work that you have to do to put together, for example, test data. Back to these examples of 15 years ago, I'd sort around file cabinets and pull out phase A, phase B, and phase C test data. Okay, well, right now that's all you could digitize all that. And you could take an airplane part and say, across the board, I've got all the data on it. What do you need to do with it? And I think for us, we can't do that on our own. We could do task work under an OEM to do that, but someone who actually has a lot of horsepower could really, really accelerate with our know-how. So I think that there's a lot of, I'd call it potential unions out there that we're looking at.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Dan, again, pleasure. It's been great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.